It's World Environment Day, and the United Nations says the COVID-19 pandemic is a clear reminder that we need to conserve nature. Scientists say protecting Earth's biodiversity could be key to avoiding another viral outbreak. Cleaner skies and rivers have been a silver lining of coronavirus lockdowns and air travel restrictions. That has also provided evidence of how the environment will change with cuts to emissions. But as lockdowns ease in parts of the world, there are concerns that emissions will rise again. And for more, we're joined by Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth has provided $30 million to small and vulnerable states to tackle climate change. Thank you very much, Ms. Scotland, for joining us this evening. How is COVID-19 a wake-up call for countries?
I think it's because we have had to recognise that we are totally interdependent. Those who were thinking that multilateralism was dead and that we could do it all on our own, we've really understood that that's just not possible, that we are interdependent and that we have to work together, and the only solutions that we can come up with have to be global solutions, partnership solutions, which will work for all of us if we're to leave no one behind. And that's the same for climate, because we are facing a climate crisis. And it's really important today that when we look at COVID-19, we have to recognise that we can't go back to business as usual. We need to build back better, build forward, and make sure that what we do works both for our people, but also for our planet.
And how have smaller, vulnerable countries been affected by not just natural disasters, but this pandemic as well at the same time? What sort of challenges have they faced?
Well, it's been terrifying for most of the small states. You'll know that a number of the small states in our Commonwealth, particularly in the Caribbean and the Pacific, are heavily dependent on tourism. And so as they lock down their countries to save the lives of their people, they're also cutting off the lifeblood of their economies. Some of these small states have between 50 and 70% of their economy dependent on tourism and tourism-associated services. So if you look at the economic cost to the world, we know that about $220 billion is going to be cut off from the reality of what the economy could have produced. And that's really going to be very dramatic for these small, vulnerable states. If you look at what's happened in the last few years, we've seen last year the devastation that took place in the Bahamas. Billions of dollars wiped off their books. But in my own country of birth, in Dominica, 226% of the GDP wiped away. So when we look forward, we have to come up with a new paradigm. We've got to say, how do we regenerate our land, but how do we regenerate our economies? How do we make sure that the 60% of our population in the Commonwealth, which is under the age of 30, how do we make sure that they have jobs for tomorrow? And this actually is a huge challenge for us, but it is also an opportunity. Because what we're doing is we're pooling the empirical data from right across the Commonwealth. We're analysing what has happened during this lockdown to our environment, our opportunity to take care of the outcomes in a way that we've never been able to do before. We've demonstrated the impact of the reduction in carbon. So those who would say that we, human beings, have no impact on our environment, during this period when the world has had to take a breath and stop, we know the consequence of that to nature. And nature has rebounded with beauty and with absolute energy, and much more quickly than any of us had anticipated. Now, that data is something we can now use to craft the response that we globally need to make. And we're seeing that in the initiative that we have entered into with UNITAR on our common sensing, which is a common sensing initiative which is using the data that we have been able to cull from the satellites and the satellite imaging to tell us what we need to do, when we need to do it, and putting that information into the hands of our member states, who can now make better decisions because they know more accurately what is coming.
Correct. So saying all that, because COVID-19 restrictions are easing in many parts of the world, we look at China's pollution levels, it has climbed back to what they were pre-pandemic. You look at Europe, it's also facing a similar situation. And, the world as a whole, as it recovers from the coronavirus, what needs to be done to ensure that countries don't reverse the environmental progress made in these past few months?
I think we have to really come together and say it cannot be business as usual. We cannot go back to where we were because all of these things are interconnected. What we're doing on our land is having an impact on our oceans. What's happening in our oceans is having an impact on our atmosphere. What's happening in our atmosphere is affecting our own health. And that interconnection, we really have to wake up and understand is a reality. This is an opportunity for us. It is not just looking at where we've been, we now have to look at where are we going. So I think there is an opportunity for us when we're looking at the nationally contributed, determined contributions that we want to make on the climate issue, to look at how would we do that in a way that's consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we create a more regenerative, more holistic approach to our response economically, environmentally, and as human beings. And we can do this. We just can't do it on our own, but we can do it together. And what I am really proud of is the work that has been possible for us to do at the Climate Finance Access Hub. The link between the data that's coming from our scientists, the innovation that's coming from our young people, and the opportunity to merge those to make sure that as we build the new infrastructure, we do it in a way that's resilient. Because if you look at what's happened on the cyclones that have hit West Bengal and the way in which we've had to respond to the cyclones in the Pacific and the way we're going to have to respond, because we are preparing for another hurricane season, it's telling us a lesson. We have to build differently. We have to build in a way that will make us more resilient, but that does not have to undermine our economies, because these new blue and green strategies are what's going to be our new economic strength for the future. But we have to choose. History is made. It isn't just happen. We have to make these concrete decisions for our future.
And we do have to be on the right side of history as well. Thank you for speaking with us, Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, speaking to us from London.